In 1973, a movie entitled Walking Tall was released. It told the supposedly true story of Tennessee Sheriff Buford Pusser, making him a national hero. Two more sequels were released, Walking Tall Part 2 and Walking Tall, the Final Chapter, as well as books, a remake, and television series. Several months ago, I saw a YouTube video entitled Buford Pusser, The Other Story. I was immediately intrigued. It featured guests that actually knew him. They had a completely different story from the movies. I purchased a book of the same name. It featured many interviews as well as documents to back up all of their statements. What I like most about the channel and the book is that the author is not out to get Buford and make him look bad. Like most people, he loved the movie and he simply wants the facts. His motto is, the truth has no agenda. The truth is simply what it is. The truth is always without feeling or opinion. Truth is inanimate and without life. So that being said, please welcome author Mike Elam to tell his side of Buford Pusser, The Other Story. So Mike, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Thank you very much for being on the show. I really do appreciate this. And
thank you for having me.
Just like you, I'm 55, so I think I saw part 2 first. That came out in 77, I think. So I grew up with that one, and then I went back and watched them all. I was a huge Buford Pusser fan. My friend lives in Tennessee. I went down to the museum. I said, oh my God, this is great. This guy is a national hero. And maybe about a month ago, 2 months ago, I'm rewatching the movie just for the hell of it, because, I know why, because I'm meeting Bo Svensson at the Chiller Theater. I said, I haven't seen that movie in a while. And then your video popped up. I said, what is this? This seems very interesting. And I've watched all your videos. I talked to you on the phone. I bought your book. I read it. So that being said, when did you finally, or how long ago and why did you sit down and say, you know what, something doesn't seem right with the story. I want to get to the bottom of this.
Well, I guess it was somewhere around 2000. I seriously got into studying the real story somewhere around 2004. So it's been about 20 years now.
Yeah.
And, that was when the internet was actually becoming fairly useful, actually. And I'd been researching Buford, and, there wasn't much information out there initially. But then I ran across the photos of the ambush, the vehicle that he was driving, and also a report on Louise Hathcock, who he had shot and killed, scene that was shown in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
In the movie, her name was Callie Hacker. They fictionalized most of the names, I assume, for liability reasons.
Yeah.
That they were not telling it exactly as it happened.
Just a little different from the truth. A little off. Well, I want to go right to the beginning of the book, because in the beginning of the book, it opens up with the story of Bill Way. Who is he and what did he find?
Bill Way was a reporter and photographer that accompanied Warren Jones with the TBI to the ambush scenes that morning. They both lived in Jackson, which is about 45-minute drive from Selmer, where the sheriff's office was. Of course, the ambush took place about 17 miles south of that. And he went down. He was a photographer. He took a lot of the photos that we have today. And he was just kind of amazed by what he saw. Now, Dennis Hathcock, in that first chapter, was the young man who found the ambush site, which I've made a good acquaintance with over the years.
Oh yeah, I've seen many interviews that you have done with him on your YouTube channel, and he is Louise's nephew. Is that correct?
Great nephew.
Okay. Yep. Now, in the book, they said some thought it was a dispute gone bad, including Clifford Coleman, who was a former McNairy County sheriff. So when this happened originally, was Buford ever questioned?
No, there's no indication that he was. Just one of those things where I assume that they just kind of took his word for everything. Maybe they just didn't want to challenge him. But he was never really considered as a suspect, at least that the public knows of.
Which is odd, because maybe the people who saw the movie who don't really know him think he's a national hero, but a lot of the locals knew what he was, and a lot of them referred to Buford as a thug that took and even demanded payoffs. So a lot of people, at least at that time, knew what he was. I'm surprised that they didn't look just a little bit deeper into it and say, maybe something's not right with because we're going to talk about this with the ambush. he has different story than what he changed several times. That's what I'm trying to say. His story changed several times.
Right. It did. Um, you know, episode right now on the ambush, but basically what happened was that he uh, started telling people that he was going to be stalked and killed. And this was about 4 weeks before the ambush took place. At the same time, he had a girlfriend. I call her Lady A. She is still alive, so I don't want to expose her name. At any rate, he was telling her that Pauline wouldn't be a problem much longer.
Mm-hmm.
So, then 4 weeks later, the ambush takes place and Pauline is gone. So, there's some circumstances there that are a little bit strange. And I think a lot of the reason why it wasn't investigated well was political. I think you had some people at the local level as well as the state level that didn't want to see Buford prosecuted at all.
But why would that be?
Well, several reasons. Some of them weren't leading the most honest lives themselves.
Okay.
And I imagine it's, Ray Blanton, for instance, was the state representative for Tennessee. He was a U.S. representative. And he and Buford were both from the same town. One was a Republican, one was a Democrat, but yet Buford, when he was running for governor in '74, was campaigning for Blanton. And as you may know, Blanton, while he served as governor, got in a lot of trouble for selling paroles and pardons to inmates.
Okay. It's definitely a little bit more clear to me now. Let's go back to the night before, because who was it that? Well, let's go back even further, which I found this out through your book, because in the movie it makes it seem like Pauline, his wife, and he were happily married, and I want to go for a ride. I want to spend some time with you. In reality, they were separated. She was living in a motel, so they weren't even together at the time. And let's talk about that night before. One of her friends, who, ironically, her husband was his deputy, overheard a conversation. What was that conversation?
Well, basically, Pauline was going to be leaving that day, or that next day. She'd been staying in a motel. She went home to collect some of her belongings. She was going to gather up the kids, and off they were going to go. Only problem was, Levon took her home and was going to take her away from the Pusser residence. I don't know exactly where she was going to take her, but Levon was invited inside the Pusser residence, and she refused to go in. She was afraid of Buford. Mm-hmm. And so she told Pauline, I'll wait down the street. You get the kids rounded up, you get all your personal belongings that you want to take, flash your porch light a couple of times. I'll pull up in front of the house. We can throw everything in the car and we'll be gone. Well, she went parked down the street a little ways. And about that time, she saw Buford go by. He pulls into the driveway, walks in the house, and, Levon isn't sure what to do. She hears one gunshot and she knows that she can't, call the sheriff's office about it because Buford is the sheriff. His dad is the dispatcher that night. So, he's not going to be of any help. She can't call her husband because she already knows that he will lie for Buford and possibly get himself in trouble. And like she told me, she said, I had kids to raise. I needed, their dad at home. So I didn't dare, risk getting him involved. And so she went on home and was trying to decide what she could do when her husband called her and told her that Pauline was killed in an ambushment for Buford.
Wow. And also during that screaming match, the little fight they had, she was threatening to say, report all the corruption, all the payoffs they did. And the last thing he said to her was, if you do that, it's to be the last thing you ever see.
Yeah, That happened actually the night before
Oh,
at the
night before, yes. That was at because they.
old grill.
Okay.
She went looking for Buford. That's when they got into a big argument. Two ladies that were there overheard the argument, and they reported that when Pauline said that she would report his corruption, and the reason that she would have been doing that is they had one biological child together, and Pauline wanted to make sure that she got Tawana, and so she threatened Buford like that and said, I'll report all the payoffs and everything that's been going on. And he said, you do that and you won't live to see the light of day.
Yeah. There's so many fights between those two. I'm just getting them. They're all blurring together. That's why.
Yeah.
I feel bad the most for is Tawana. I mean, she lost her mother. She lost her father. And then, unfortunately, she is deceased as well. And we talked about that off the air. Then you mentioned the real story of what happened to her. So, I feel so bad for her because she was just caught. And she's the one that found Buford's body. We'll get into that later when during the car wreck. So I can only imagine everything that she went through as a child and even as an adult. There was also, that was the night before. The night of, she heard the shout. There was also one other witness that was in the house. Who was that?
That was Pauline's oldest daughter, Diane. She was from a previous marriage to Pete Vance. She had been staying in Memphis with Buford's sister and didn't want to be around Buford. They had their problems. And one of those situations where Pauline had called her, said, you need to come home. I'm having problems with Buford. And I think what she was doing was making sure she had all of her children there together. So whenever they left, they would just be out of there. And that night, she heard a pop, as she described it to an associate of mine. And, that was the gunshot that Levon heard. And she was afraid to go out into the living room to see what was going on. She was so afraid of Buford. So she heard the front door open and close, and she looked out a window and saw Buford carrying, half dragging Pauline to the car, put her in the front seat, walked back toward the house, and Diane actually thought he was coming back to get her. Mm-hmm. And about that time, he leaned down and picked up Pauline's shoes that had fallen from her feet and set them in the floorboard of the car, which kind of plays into this a little bit later as far as evidence.
Yeah. And there was a reason she wasn't living at the house with them, because there was allegations that she made against Buford. So I was surprised that she was actually in the house with him at that same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very, like I say, Pauline had called that day and asked her to come home.
Yeah.
They were going to be leaving.
And did she ever make a statement to the police about that, or was she too afraid as well?
I think she was too afraid. She didn't know who she could talk to either. I mean, her step grandfather works for Buford at the sheriff's office. All the law enforcement officers that she was close to in any way all worked up there with him. So who can you share that information with and feel safe?
Yeah. Plus, he already had his own story of why she wasn't living in the same house as him, making up stories, or according to what he was saying was true about what she was doing. That's why she supposedly had her own problems. So yeah, they're not. Who are they going to believe, the cops or her? So I completely understand why she kept quiet on that one. And also, which night was this when, as you mentioned, his father Carl was a dispatcher? He said, "Get over there because I think they're going to kill each other."
Well, that was actually the early morning hours of the 12th.
Oh my God. So it's like, yeah, it's just,
we're talking somewhere in the vicinity of 2 a.m.
Wow. So there was a lot of things going on within that 24-hour period.
Yeah, right. More to your point, Carl had called the county coroner, Ward Moore.
Yes.
And I interviewed him, and he told me that, he got a call. Carl told him that Buford and Pauline were in a fight. They were going to kill each other. Of course, the coroner has the authority to arrest the sheriff if need be. So he goes over there. When he arrives, Pauline and Buford are both gone. He goes in the house. He sees droplets of blood on the carpet, which is totally unlike blood spatter. Blood droplets, it would be like if you have a busted lip or, a bloodied nose, and it's droplets falling straight down, as opposed to being spatter, which has a wide pattern. And so he didn't know what to make of it. I assume that he told Carl what he saw, and I'm just assuming at that. But with them not being there, anything going on, he didn't have any choice to do anything other than just leave at that point.
Now, did Ward have a chance to see the body of Pauline?
He did. He also worked for a local funeral home, and he was the one that prepared her body for burial. And he described her head wound as really devastating. And it was, she had a lot of the top and back of her head blown away.
Wow. Did he have, back then, did he have his opinion that it might have been something more than what Buford was saying?
Oh, yeah. He told me that he thought that Buford had murdered her.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I know what you're telling me, and you see this happening all over the place with the politics and everything, but most of the time it is the spouse who's the first suspect. It doesn't matter who it is. They're like, all right. And especially with all the history of them fighting. So it's just, I mean, I know the politics was very powerful, but I can't believe, that's why I'm so happy that people like you are bringing the story to light, which, for people who don't know, they exhumed Pauline after how many years was it? 50 years?
56 years.
56 years. They exhumed the body. They just buried it. Wow. So now was this recently just because people like you were coming forward and saying, you know what, there's something not right with this? Because what prompted them after 56 years to say, all right, let's exhume her and find out the real story?
Well, there's only so much I can say here.
Okay, say what you can.
But I'll do the best I can. I use my Facebook page, which is Buford Pusser, The Other Story. I have the YouTube channel, Buford Pusser, The Other Story. I have the book by the same name. But I use my Facebook page as a fishing hole, if you will. I'll cast a line out, ask a couple of questions, and occasionally I'll get a bite. And people would share things with me. The one thing I didn't realize at the time was that the TBI was actually following my page. And, for instance, one of the things that I learned, I had an individual call me one time and say, I've been following your page for 6.5 years. Wow. And I think that I may have the gun that had been used in the ambush. And I was thinking to myself, man, this is a story I've heard at least a dozen times. But I always ask. And this individual had a story that just fit the circumstances to a T. So I asked him the question. I said, would you be willing to surrender the gun to the TBI for ballistics testing? And his first question was, well, will I get it back? I have no idea. It depends on the status of the gun, I guess. At any rate, I got in my car, drove over there, got the information from it, and I called the TBI. And at first I got a couple of, got shut down pretty quickly. They'd just simply say, we don't share information about ongoing investigations, so on and so forth. So the third time I decided to change my strategy and said, I'm not asking you to share anything. I've got something I want to share with you. I think I may know where the gun is that was possibly used in Pauline's murder. And next thing I know, they're calling me and asking me questions. And I worked it out with the gun's present owner. They went by, picked it up, and they now have it in their possession for testing. That was about this time last year, a little bit later in the year. And since then, I've been turning over a lot more of the information that I've gathered to them, things that I had not posted on my Facebook page.
Okay.
And next thing you know, they're exhuming Pauline.
Well, right now it is April 16th. I'm going to have you back on the show, hopefully by the second week of May, when hopefully we will have an answer to how Pauline was actually killed. So I'm hoping that's going to be a Claw's Corner exclusive, I hope. And
Oh,
yeah, it's going to be interesting. I am following this. I mean, I love the videos you put up. I've read the book inside and out, and it just intrigues me. I love this story because it's completely shatters the myth of everything that I thought I knew. And
I felt like I destroyed my own hero.
well, you know what's funny, because I am definitely not a person of conspiracy theories. I'm not one of these people like, oh my God, they put chips in the vaccine. I'm not like that. But what I love about you is that everything you say, you have the documents to back it up. And if people don't believe me, buy the book, look at his Facebook, watch his YouTube, and you have people that, as I mentioned in the intro, that actually knew him, that were actually there. It's not just somebody that's saying, well, I think this and maybe that. I'm speculating. Everything you say, you can back up. And I have so much respect for that. So I laugh when I see these people trying to fight with you or say different things. I'm like, you really don't know what you're talking about. Why don't you open up the book and you'll realize that Mike is just stating the facts.
Well, like I say, like you covered earlier, I always feel like the truth has no agenda. So you try to put out there what you know and try to back it up. And that's the best way to get the message across.
And you actually did your own investigation on the chase, you and Dennis. Let's talk about that. I love that.
I met Dennis online by chance one night. I was on a forum called the Firing Line, which is where a lot of police officers and law enforcement people go to discuss firearms, things like that. And someone had posted about a little 25 caliber semi-automatic handgun, and somebody else said, well, that's like one that Pauline Pusser would carry. And you mentioned the last name Pusser, and then everybody starts talking about what a great guy Buford was. And I knew enough by then to say, well, not so much. And I started sharing some of what I knew. And of course, it caused quite a conversation that night. Some of the guys were interested, and some of them thought I was some kind of fool off of the planet Xenon or wherever. At any rate, about 30 minutes later, my phone rings. And this voice is saying, I'd like to know where you got all your information. I said, well, I've just researched the subject some. And he said, well, you're as close to telling the truth about all this as anybody I've ever heard. And after a little while, you get a little bit anxious and you say, well, who is this? And he said, well, my name is Dennis Hathcock. And ironically, I had an old newspaper item from 1981 where he was interviewed in there by Jerry Heacock, who was writing a book about one of Buford's enemies. And it was mentioned that Dennis's role in some of this. And so, I interviewed him just about every night for 3 straight weeks. Mm-hmm. And finally got in the car, drove over there and spent a few days. And, he introduced me to a lot of people that knew their own little part of the story. It's like nobody knows it all. Each of these people just know the little part that they played. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I've been trying to knit together.
Yeah. Well, what I was talking about too is that during where the ambush happened, it's winding roads, and they're saying that the car didn't even have its headlights on. So you driving your car and Dennis driving his car wanted to test to see if the car would actually be able to catch up with yours. And what happened during that little investigation?
Well, there was actually 4 of us, 2 in I had a rider in my car. We had a cameraman in Dennis's car, and I passed by the church. We didn't know how fast that Buford was supposed to be driving that day. So I set my cruise control on about 45 miles an hour, figuring Buford drove fast back then. The road was, pretty iffy. It was a county road.
Mhm.
So I just set my cruise control on 45 miles an hour. Dennis and the cameraman came after me. I got to the bridge. I'm looking up in the rearview mirror, and they are just barely coming into sight.
Yeah.
And, you know, right then you knew that they could not have accomplished what that Buford said they did, especially considering we did it at 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the morning. And Buford, uh, when the ambush occurred, the TBI and Jim Moffitt, the chief deputy for McNairy County, established the ambush took place at 4:45 in the morning.
Mhm.
And to drive that stretch of road with no headlights, because I mean, Dennis got in excess of 90 miles an hour trying to catch me on that road in daylight.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine
Well,
what
well,
this ambush party must have been doing.
oh my, well, definitely. And what was the cameraman's reaction?
uh, he tells me later he apologizes. He's out of Tupelo. His name's Terry Swindle. He was a old cameraman in Hollywood back in the day, and he says, I know that uh, the cameraman's not supposed to make any noise whatsoever on the set. And he said, but if you'll listen at this one part, you're going to hear me say, watch it, watch it, watch it, because he said, I thought we were leaving the road.
Yeah.
And he said it really scared him. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, Dennis is a very interesting character. I've watched, I think, most, if not all, the interviews you've done with him. And let's talk first about what he found at the ambush site. First, he was there. He was a young boy. I think it was he and his friends, and they said, "Get out of the area. Why don't you go down the road?" And what happened when he did that?
Well, go back just a little bit. Dennis and Johnny had been following Buford the night before.
Yep.
And somewhere right around midnight, shortly after, Buford went to Eastview, a state maintenance uh, lot or a state park. And Dennis and Johnny knew that this was a place that he would always go or often go. So they went to the state maintenance lot that was right next to it, got up on a pile of rock and chat. And so that they could see, Buford pulled in. One of his girlfriends pulled in. They had words. He chased her off. And then a little bit later, a car pulls in and Buford goes through an exchange of firearms. And
Mm-hmm.
so then they follow him back to Selmer. And in a short time, Buford heads home. And that's when Levon heard what she heard. Diane saw what she saw. Ward would come in a little bit later. But then the next morning, right after Buford, they determined he was going home. Well, they went home themselves. Johnny was calling him early the next morning, saying, hey, there was an ambush on New Hope Road. Buford was shot. Pauline's been killed. So Dennis gets on his motorcycle and goes to New Hope Road. When he got up there, he was near the church. He wasn't sure which way to head, so he headed south toward the state line. And in about 7/10 of a mile, he comes to the first ambush site, and here's a constable there that tells him, you don't need to be here. This is a crime scene, chases him off. So Dennis goes on down toward the state line, goes 2.1 miles, and all of a sudden he sees glass and all these shell casings in the road. And he stops and thinks, back there is not where it happened. It happened down here. And so while he's there, he looks around and he sees two things that were of significance to me. One was a matchbook cover over in a ditch. And you have to keep in mind that the road had just been freshly maintained. Back then they would oil it down and put shad on it, and they had bladed out the ditches. So it was easy. When he looked over into the ditch, he saw this matchbook cover from a place called Hernando's Hideaway in Memphis. It was a place that both Buford and Pauline would go.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, while he was looking down there, he saw a piece of her scalp and with blonde bladed hair. And, he didn't take him long to decide what had happened. So he went back and caught the constable down there, R.C. Matlock, who was at the first ambush scene, and told him that you know, its ambush took place down this way. And about that time is when the TBI arrived.
And wasn't there something with the skull that was neatly stacked up as well?
Yeah, that was a thing that Ward Moore mentioned because he and Coleman went down there that morning as well. And they were saying that Pauline's brain, it looked like that it had been placed rather than just gone out of the car when she was shot, that it had been placed and more or less stacked up. And, with Ward being a coroner and Clifford Coleman having been in law enforcement for years and years, well, they thought that looked really suspicious, like that was staged.
Mm-hmm.
And the shell casings look staged as well.
Yeah. And another thing that does not fit with the story is the fact that he said that the guy was so close he grabbed the gun. And if that was the case, how could the guy at that close range miss him so many times? I mean,
Yeah.
he's superficial shot. I mean, they make it seem in the movie that he blew off his whole chin, and that's not the case. He blew off his whole jaw. That's not the case.
Oh, he was shot in the chin.
Yeah.
Now, it was a fairly severe injury, but it wasn't like it showed in the movie where he had his jaw blown away.
Yeah, yeah.
He didn't have to wear a cast, anything like that, like the movie would indicate. It was Buford said that he had got down to where the second ambush occurred, and said he stopped to check on Pauline. He had opened his door, started to get out to go around and check on her, that he had one foot on the ground and the other foot was still in the car. They pulled up beside him, stopped right beside him. Nothing like what it showed in the movie. Open fire. He got hit in the chin, fell to the floorboard, and then Pauline got hit a second time, he said. And, at some point during all of this, he reached out and grabbed the barrel of the rifle he claimed, which I don't know if you're used to being around firearms, but, there were somewhere between 14 and 17 shots that were fired.
Yeah.
And a rifle barrel is going to get hot when you shoot it that many times. And for him to reach out and grab that barrel doesn't make a whole lot of sense that he could hold on to it.
No.
And he claimed that, he let go when they drove off. So I don't know why that they didn't make sure that they had finished him off when they first shot him.
Oh yeah.
That was their intent.
I know. Well, I thought the same thing too. And then also, wasn't there a closer hospital he could have taken her to, and said he decided to go to a completely different one, like further away?
And there, he went, turned and went towards Selmer when he got down to the state line. If he had turned left and gone into Mississippi, the hospital was probably a third of the distance than the one to Selmer, or less. And it was a better equipped, better staffed hospital than what Selmer had. So that made no sense unless you consider that he was wanting to keep it all in the state that he was the sheriff in, and didn't want to get the FBI involved by crossing the state line.
Yep. And the other thing with the whole ambush, how, I think you mentioned in the book and also on the YouTube channel, how did they know which way he was actually going to go? Because isn't there a different way that he could have went, but he took a more obscure route?
There were several ways that he could have gone to the state line.
Yeah.
The disturbance was actually supposed to be at a place called the Hollis Jordan's Beer Tavern. And that's on 45 North, about a mile north of the state line. The shorter of the routes would have been the route that he took, but it would have been much, much slower just because the condition of the road, being a county road, a lot of it unimproved, where if he'd have just gone a couple of blocks over from his house, got on Highway 64 and gone into Selmer, turned left on 45, he could have had the gas pedal to the floorboard all the way and been there quicker by taking that route. But the other one, there was almost no population. So I guess one way that I was looking at it is if You don't want anyone to know what you're up to. You take the route that he took, which makes you wonder why an ambush party would know to be waiting at that church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of questions, a lot of questions with this. Well, I want to go back to the beginning and get to where we are now, because
Oh,
in the very beginning, as you said, Buford was a mama's boy, but he had a dark side.
yeah.
He would shoot stray dogs with his CO2 guns. So even back then, there was a side to him that liked violence.
Uh, there was, I've interviewed some of the people that knew him while he was in school. Uh, you know, he would claim, for instance, that he went to uh, Savannah, town near Adamsville, where he lived when he was a kid. He would come back with his arms cut up, and he would claim that he was attacked over there by, a gang of boys, that so on and so forth. So he's always doing these things to, self mutilation to convince your friends that you were attacked is kind of strange. It's kind of like being in a town the size of Adamsville, which back then was only about 900 people.
Hmm.
And small town, everybody knows everybody else, and there's not that many stray dogs to go out shooting. So he was taking a CO2 pistol out and probably shooting someone's pet and knowing he was doing it. But there's that side, that dark side there, that he liked being cruel to animals. He'd self mutilate himself. Uh, a lot of signs there that he was troubled.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to talk about the legend of Buford and the White Iris.
Okay. Are you talking about,
When he saw Louise
okay.
supposedly kill the sailor.
Yeah, that was kind of interesting because when I got to checking into that, there's a story that while he was in high school, he and some high school buddies went down to the White Iris, and they got there, got in a booth uh, while that they were there, and they were going to have a beer, be big guys, and uh, there was a sailor that was saw something he didn't like, and he was talking to some of the staff about it. And next thing you know, well, Buford claimed that Louise came over, took a ball peen hammer out of her apron, and beat this sailor in the head until he was dead. And Buford said that they left all this. Well, when I got to checking into this story, I was thinking, man, how corrupt was law enforcement down there that they would let that go on? And W.R. Morris in the 12th of August wrote that, they just explained that, the poor guy had a heart attack. And so when I got to checking into it, I located this sailor's family down in Pensacola, Florida. And they were saying, no, dad didn't die until 2012, natural causes. And I had him on my YouTube channel and
Yep.
interviewed Earl McCoy. His dad was Kenneth McCoy. He was an aviator in the Navy. And, he had just finished flight school and, come home on leave. And he said, Earl told me that their dad said it wasn't at the White Iris. The place had a number in the name. Mm-hmm. And the only place that was down there was the 45 Club, which straddled the Mississippi-Tennessee line. And it wasn't Louise at all. It was Towhead White mm-hmm. that, actually got into it with McCoy. White said, let's do the manly thing, take this outside and settle it. And didn't want to create a ruckus there at the club. So they drove a little ways off. When McCoy was getting out of his car, Towhead hit him in the back of the head before he was out of the car, mm-hmm. knocked him unconscious. They kicked him, stomped him. And then as they were leaving to go back to the 45 grill, they ran over his legs with their car. And, Earl sent me a photograph of his dad on crutches.
Yep. A little bit different from what Buford was saying.
Yeah,
just a little bit.
The legend is not quite what you think it is.
But even back then, weren't people saying, Buford, you're a liar? I mean, I'm sure there were some people that said, there's not, I mean, not besides the politics of that, but people that were like his friends are like, you're full of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
I had a close friend of his, a young lady at the time, was telling me that, if the Buford had a cruel streak. Now, if he liked you, he would take care of you.
Mhm.
And if he didn't like you, he could be an absolute bully.
Yeah.
So, you know, uh, his reputation went both ways.
Yeah.
And it just depended on which side of his that you happen to fall on.
Mm-hmm. What was funny was I jumped down the YouTube rabbit hole and I was watching all these different videos and I saw an interview with Jimmy Buffett and he said that one time he was doing, I don't know if you know the video I'm talking about where he
Oh,
jumped
yeah.
in the car, yeah, and he had no idea who it was and Buford beat the shit out of him. Didn't he beat his car up too? Like he just smashed the car, and then he realized it wasn't until later. Holy shit, that was Buford Pusser.
you know, uh, I guess he was in Memphis at the time.
Yeah.
And allegedly, that is a true story.
I don't think.
So,
Yeah, I don't think he'd have a reason to lie about that. Unlike
uh,
unlike Buford, who I don't think he ever told the truth, because let's talk about later on with his in the movie they make it seem like Pauline makes a comment. I want to say it verbatim, but I haven't seen the movie in a while. It's like, boy, you've been in the military 3 years, and we've had more violence here in McNairy County than we've ever had. So, what was his real military history?
out of high school, he thought that military men were just great looking people in that uniform,
Yeah.
everything. He was impressed by it. His mom would say that. And so he joins the Marine Corps and he doesn't make it out of boot camp. So I guess he was a recruit, but he was never actually a Marine, if you will.
Yeah.
He was discharged for asthma, a problem that he never seemed to have trouble with before or after.
Uh,
So,
yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't 3 years fighting in the military like the movie made it seem.
I think it was 3 years in the military and 5 years in the ring.
Yeah, wrestling. I want to go back because we talked about Towhead White. For people who don't know who he is, let's talk about him because even you said without Towhead White and without the Hathcocks, there would be no Buford Pusser. So who was Towhead White?
Okay. Every good guy needs a bad guy to make the story work, I guess. Towhead White came from the Delta area of Mississippi, moved to the state line area when he was, probably 14, 15 years old. Went there with a buddy of his who was an older guy. He was almost 18, I guess. And they went in to see Jack Hathcock to get a job at the 45 Grill. And, he asked them, well, what are you guys qualified to do? So they answered bodyguards. And Jack said, well, I've got one over there. And so Junior, the older guy, stayed there with Towhead, pardon me, with Jack. And the story goes that Towhead went over to the bodyguard who thought he was going to get a handshake. And instead, he got a foot up the side of his head and knocked him unconscious. And Towhead turned out to be a career criminal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the Walking Tall movies, he wasn't even mentioned. But in real life, he was the only person in the story that actually earned his reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, he wanted to be the Al Capone of the South.
Yeah.
And he was working at doing it.
And that was the only guy that, I mean, there might be more, but the only guy that Buford was really afraid of.
Yeah.
Yeah, he feared him. And it was funny because Towhead, because Buford was doing the payoffs, or he was paying off Buford, I mean, so he thought that he owned Buford, and Buford saw it differently. So there was a lot of like two type A personalities that were both tough guys. And
well, Towhead was almost as big as Buford. He was like 6'3". Buford was 6'6".
Yeah.
Towhead would go about 200 pounds, depending on the day. Well, Buford would balance anywhere between probably 240 and 260. So they were pretty equally matched physically, but Towhead was he was like Buford. He was just a tough guy,
Yeah.
and he didn't back away from a fight. And, supposedly a handsome guy. All the women that I interviewed said that seeing Towhead drive down the street in Corinth in his Cadillac was like seeing Elvis Presley. They were all impressed. But he would be into everything. They ran the razzle game at the state line. He was into bootlegging, moonshining. He was kind of tied in with what became the Dixie Mafia, in that, they were a roving band of outlaws who would occasionally work together. It's like, I know you understand how to crack a safe, and the guy over here knows how to get around an alarm system. So they might get together and do a job and never work together again, split the money on it. Towhead was into a lot of stuff like that. And so he was, like I say, well on his way to being the Al Capone of the South that he wanted to be.
Yeah. And there's one, so I can't remember his name right now. I probably have it in my notes, but his friends were sort of goading him into it. It's like, oh, this guy right here, he's the toughest guy. You're nowhere near as tough as him. And didn't he almost kill the guy? It was at a restaurant or bar. I can't remember his name. I have to look it up.
Well, Tommy Bivens is the
That's
one
it.
you're speaking of.
Yes, Tommy Bivens.
Tommy was another person that was really tough. And everyone I've spoken with liked Tommy. Said he was a nice guy. You didn't want to piss him off, but he was a nice guy. He would didn't go out of his way to create any problems for you, but he wouldn't back down from a fight either. So somebody was in the Shamrock restaurant one night. It was really late, and they were saying, "Hey, Towhead, Tommy Bivens is over there, and he's pretty tough, And Towhead had been drinking a little bit, so first thing you know, and Tommy and Towhead are friends, or at least Towhead thinks they are.
Yeah.
At any rate, he starts kind of getting after Tommy a little bit, trying to pick a fight, and Tommy's telling him, "I'll go on. We don't need to do this." And so Towhead hits him. Tommy comes up out of the booth, grabs him by the shirt, pounds him into the ground, and goes over, sits back down. Well, Towhead goes into the kitchen where Louise is, gets her handgun, comes back out, and calls him a few names.
Yep.
And then sticks the 38 in his face and shoots him right by the nose.
Wow.
And to which Tommy got up and beat him again.
Wow.
W.O. Hathcock and Larice were trying to get Tommy to leave the restaurant, didn't want to go. He wasn't going to let Towhead chase him off, but they knew they needed to get him to a hospital. He almost, he came pretty close to dying from that gunshot wound.
Yeah.
But he wouldn't press charges against Towhead later.
Yeah. Well, he wouldn't press charges, and from what I remember, he also went to work for him after that too. I was really surprised when I read that.
Yeah. When Towhead decided to get big time into the moonshining business, he had a still in McNairy County where Buford was, which seemed kind of strange because at one point in time, Buford and Towhead got along. I'm not exactly sure where the relationship fell apart, except that both of them felt like they ran the place, the county. But when things fell apart, I don't know if Towhead felt like he needed to move the still because of Buford might, take advantage of it, or if Buford may have warned him that, hey, the state's, coming around doing raids. At any rate, they decided that they were going to, Towhead decided he's going to move the steel out of McNairy County down to Tishomingo County.
Mm-hmm.
And he hires Tommy, who was off work from the pipeline at the time, to haul, I think it's 155 55-gallon barrels from McNairy County down to the Tishomingo County, where he was setting the steel back up.
Yeah.
And all of them got arrested down there 6 days after they make the big move.
No.
So,
Let's get back to Buford, because I want to talk to you about why was he arrested in January of 1960.
well, you saw the scene in the movie,
Yes.
which the movie was very loosely based on reality. He had got out of the Marines. The real story is he got out of the Marines. He had been in a car wreck, was laid up for some time. And then he decided, when he did get a little bit better, that he was going to go down to the state line and party a little bit, gamble, whatever. And he goes down to the Plantation Club, which was, unlike what you saw in the movie, it was in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And that was owned by W. Hathcock, Dennis's dad, and Louise's nephew, or at any rate, he gets in there, thinks that he's being cheated, and that's when he gets into a fight, gets allegedly got cut up, beat up, all this, which did not happen. And that's one thing that people need to know. That never happened. But at any rate, in 1960, or actually 1959, it was December, he goes back down to the state line with two friends, and they rob the Plantation Club, take a little over $1,000, which would be about like taking $10,000 today. Mm-hmm. And they go back to Chicago. And on, I think it was the 4th of January, 1960, they get arrested and brought back to Alcorn County, Mississippi, to stand trial for the robbery. Mm-hmm. So, and they all get acquitted.
Well, this is the funny part, because what was his alibi?
Well, he claimed that they didn't have, that they were going down to visit a friend. And when they got there, the friend that was, that they were going to visit wasn't at home. So they just turned around and went back to Chicago. When actually they apparently went on down to the state line, robbed W. Hathcock and the Plantation Club, and drove back to Chicago. But in the trial, what no one knew was that they were in the attorneys, their defense was that he didn't have time to make that drive from the time he got off work until to rob the place and get back home by the time he did in Chicago. What they didn't know was that they had left early that day and had a friend clock all three of these guys out. Yep. And so it gave the appearance that they were at work all day, when actually they had left early and had plenty of time to get to the state line, rob it, and get back.
And he stupidly admitted to friends later on that he had other people do that, right?
Admitted to a reporter.
Oh, reporter team. Wow.
He was kind of bragging about it, saying, hey, he got what he deserved, all this and that. So.
And just for people who understand, it's not like his friend, who he never bothered to call to see if he was home, lived right down the road. It was a 600-mile drive. Yeah. Let's take a ride and see if they're... And the thing I found surprising too, and I want your opinion on this, because I'm guessing maybe is when he and Pauline first got together, he said that Pauline accompanied him on the ride. And did she back up his story because the relationship was brand new and they were just falling in love, and maybe she just said, oh yeah, I was with him?
I would imagine that was the case. You had a lot of John Pusser. At some points, it made it sound like that he was there, Buford's brother. Yeah. But yet he was not seen at the Plantation Club with the other three. So it's kind of like, okay, you go all the way down there and then you don't go inside. I don't know. Maybe he was there, maybe he wasn't. But you're right. I think that Pauline covered for Buford. It was a new relationship. They got married on early December, and he comes down here and robs the place in late December. So they're still newlyweds.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of people in the area that think that, well, Buford got married in December. Now he's got a ready-made family. He's got 2 kids there, that it's Christmas time. He needs some money. So, hey, let's go down the state line and knock over a place and, have Christmas money.
See, he's like Robin. He's stealing from the bad to give to from the poor to give to the, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. He's a good guy.
A regular Robin Hood.
I love it. Now I see Buford in a whole new light. So, how much longer after he met Pauline, they married, did he move back to McNairy County, and why did he move back to McNairy County?
He moved back in 61. There's some things here that I will reveal a little bit later. I don't want to do it right now.
Okay.
But his father had been chief of police there in Adamsville. And he was able to get Buford a job there as a patrolman.
Mm-hmm.
And so Buford made the move. At first he didn't have the job, but he did a little bit later. And that's how he got into law enforcement, was through his dad. His dad was not the farmer or the timberman that you saw in Walking Tall.
Yeah.
He had worked on the pipeline earlier and then served as chief of police of Adamsville,
yeah.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense when you think about Buford being cut up, beat up, left for dead. When he was robbed at the Plantation Club, he said, because you would think with his dad being chief of police in a nearby town that he would have raised all hell to get W.O. and whoever locked up if that had actually happened.
Yeah.
So,
well, what's your opinion on Carl? Do you think that he was just as crooked in different ways?
I think that he taught Buford a lot.
Yeah.
About all this.
Yeah.
I think Carl is alleged to have been a moonshiner from years back. And I think that, and he was supposed to be somewhat politically astute. And I think he knew that there was money to be made if you were sheriff. Mm-hmm. I think he knew that, most of them took payoffs. And the difference between Buford and the others was that Buford just took it to a whole new level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the time, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the sheriff, his name was James Dickey. When he was, because sheriff became chief, then constable. This is after being patrolman for a while. And James Dickey was the sheriff. And he was another one, like you said, back then, the pay was so low for sheriffs that a lot of them were taking payoffs from different clubs, like the Plantation Club, the Shamrock.
Most of these places would just automatically offer sheriff some money just to keep them off their back. Buford was a little different. He would tell them how much he wanted. He wouldn't take what was offered. But James Dickey was the sheriff when Buford was chief of police in Adamsville. He got promoted from being the patrolman to being chief.
No, let's stop right there for a second. What was the time frame from how long was he a patrolman to becoming a chief of police? What was the time frame for that?
Oh, very short.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Less than a year, I think.
Okay.
He becomes the chief of police, and Adamsville is small, and so he decides, hey, I'll just run for constable. So he was constable of the 3rd Civil District in McNairy County, as well as being chief of police. And then the Republican Party is looking for somebody to run against Sheriff Dickey. Mm-hmm. Well, Dickey had been a mentor to him, kind of teaching him the ropes of law enforcement and all this. And so here he's running against his mentor. Now, in the movie, it showed a Sheriff Al Thurman and how that they were just butting heads, which wasn't necessarily the case here. But Dickey did die in a very suspicious automobile accident. But I think a lot of that had to do with other factors because the U.S. attorney down in Aberdeen, Mississippi, was investigating Dickey, and they were about to indict him.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of like, well, if you're the state line crowd, maybe you get to thinking, or Towhead gets to thinking, need to get rid of Dickey and get my own sheriff in there because I've been paying Dickey and he might roll over on me to save his own hide. And so uh, there you've got a marriage of convenience as far as Towhead and Pusser.
Yeah. Which Hathcock was it that made the comment that it was one of the worst things that ever happened in State Line was the way that Dickie died?
That was W.O. That was Dennis's dad that had the plantation club.
Yep.
He didn't believe for a minute that Dickey just ran off the road and was killed. Allegedly, Towhead goaded Dickey and Pusser into having a race back towards Selmer because Dickey had a car that was on loan to him from a dealership while his car was going some maintenance. They raced about a mile north of the state line, and that's where Sheriff Dickey went off the road, was ejected from the vehicle, and died about a half hour later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there was 3 people that were running in this race. It was Pusser, James Dickey, and George Weatherford.
Right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, and so what happened with George? I mean, he just lost. He really wasn't in the race. I mean, according, and not the car race. I'm saying he wasn't really like he was more. He wasn't as popular, I guess. That's what I'm looking for.
Right. He started running for one party, and then when he didn't get the nomination, he decided to run as an independent.
Okay.
And as it turned out, after Dickey was killed in the car wreck, well, the race came down between Pusser and George Weatherford, who we never heard of.
Yeah.
And actually, Pusser only beat Weatherford by less than 300 votes.
Oh.
So it was a pretty tight race. And Dickey, even though he was dead, W.O. Morris would write that Buford, the race was really tight between he and Dickey. Dickey only got 307 votes. So the movie just fictionalized so much.
Oh yeah. Well, in the movie they have where he's putting up his posters and the other guy's ripping them down and he's wanting them down. Yeah, it's just like I said, just a few tall tales in that movie.
A lot of drama there.
A lot of drama. And I want people to know too. People don't know. Let's talk about the plantation, because we mentioned the plantation club several times. That was closed 6 months prior to him becoming sheriff. So,
correct.
And so in the movie, it makes it seem like that he closed it down, arrested all these people. How many people did he actually arrest?
Well, now get this. They claim that during his 6-year tenure as sheriff that he arrested a total of something like 8,000 people. Now, McNairy County, men, women, and children was only about 18,000 altogether.
Wow.
So I somehow have the idea that number might be inflated a bit. Plus, I think the jail would only hold something like 12 inmates at a time. So I don't know what they're calling arrest. Maybe he writes a speeding ticket and he calls that an arrest. I don't know. But there's another huge exaggeration.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the number of moonshine stills. The museum claims that it was 88. One of the people at the museum was on Moonshiners recently and claimed it was 169 his first year, while the museum was claiming it was 88, but the local newspaper reported it was 28. So
somebody's that good at math.
It all gets lost somewhere.
Actually, you mentioned the museum. I told you I went there in 2014. I found it. Well, you know what's interesting about that? I went there and they have a video before you go through the tour and you go through the house. And this guy taps me on the shoulder. He goes, "See that guy right there?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, that's me. I used to be Buford's best friend. I can't remember his name now, but he said, he goes, Buford
Was
was
it
never, what was
Jack
it?
Kaufman?
I think that might be it. That's funny. It's been so long, but that sounds familiar. And he said, you know what? He goes, everybody keeps on saying that they had him killed. He goes, this guy was just a reckless driver. He loved to drink. He loved to drive fast. He goes, nobody killed him. And I said, right then and there, I said, okay, well, this is a guy that was his best friend. He's saying this. There, and that's my first indication that like there's a lot more to the story than what I'm hearing and seeing in movies. Because I'm one of these people that whenever I see a movie, I immediately go watch several documentaries to get the real story because I know movies are inspired by or based on. They're never true.
You've got my number.
Yep. I love it. So that it was funny. So I think that you are correct that was him. But the reason I brought up the museum and you did too is I heard something recently, and or maybe I mean I saw the video recently. I should say that you said you were going to go down there and they freaked out. They called the cops. What happened with that?
Okay. Uh, on the Facebook page that I do, you had a lot of people saying, we'd like to go see all these places, but we don't know where to find them all, because they're not well marked. We'd like to see the clubs and this, that, something else. So Dennis and I got together and we put together a bus tour. And so, we were getting it, all booked up and everything. And I get a letter from the city administrator in Adamsville asking, well, are you planning on, coming down here to the museum? We understand it's on your list. Yep, we plan to. Well, we don't want you to come. We see Buford one way, you see Buford another way, and we just soon you not come by the museum. So finally, I had to ask, well, isn't the museum paid for by taxpayers, funded by taxpayers? Yes. Well, we'll see you Sunday.
I love
And when we
it.
got down there, then I had the sheriff call me after that, wanting to know what it was all about that we were doing. I told him, I said, we're just got a lot of people that want to see it. And so we've organized a bus tour. So, got along with the sheriff really well. But when we get down there with the bus tour, just about every cop in Adamsville turned out that day and was at the museum waiting on us. But the chief was there, and I cannot remember his name, and I apologize if he ever sees this video. But everybody just called him Frog. I don't know why, but when we pull up and I see all these cars out there and all these uniforms out there, I'm thinking, oh, we're going to have trouble. So I see Frog, and so I get off the bus first. I reach out, shake hands, say, Frog, been a couple of years since I've seen you, because I'd met him down at the festival one year. And he just kind of like, well, what's going on? Says, we understood there's going to be a riot or something down here. Nothing like that. I said, basically, we've got a geriatric crowd on the bus. And I said, half of them are members of state line families, and the other half is members of, law enforcement community. And they just all wanted to see all these places. So here we are. So he sent everybody except for one guy home. And we went through the museum, went over to the cemetery, had a big lunch while we were there in Adamsville, just kind of an odd set of circumstances.
I love it. It's like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth. They didn't know what to do.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of them over there that can't handle the truth. They are still declaring he is an authentic hero.
Are you still getting, I mean, hopefully not threats, but are you still getting people calling and saying, I mean, I saw one or two things a couple weeks ago, which I thought was pathetic that you have to go through that, but is it becoming less and less, or is it still, or they still feel very strongly about him 50 something years later?
It's not as bad as it was. It hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
Every week I get probably 10 to 20 really negative comments.
Yeah.
And other than that, I call them fan pages that are out there that they are not going to let Buford go down without a fight.
Yeah.
He's always going to be a hero, and I have no idea what I'm talking about, and so on. And I can't get on their pages, but I allow them on mine.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to expose them to the truth. So,
I know. No, I love what you're doing. And I want to get back to Carl for a minute because you mentioned, in the book you mentioned he's sort of like the ringleader where he's the one that you think orchestrated all these raids that he did while he was running for sheriff, even though he really didn't have jurisdiction over that area. It just gave him good press coverage.
right.
Yeah.
When Buford was running for sheriff, Carl, uh, being politically astute, as I will put it, uh, realized that Buford needed some good publicity. So Buford was constable of the 3rd District of McNairy County, which the state line was not in, but they go down and raid it anyway. Confiscate some beer, make a couple of arrests, so on and so forth, and of course it all gets tossed out of court.
Yeah.
And they have to return the beer that they confiscated. But they use that as publicity, saying, "Well, Sheriff Dickey isn't doing anything. At least Buford's making an effort."
Yeah. 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 No, it's just all smoke and mirrors. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew how to play the public.
Oh
He
yeah.
played it well. So I want to talk about in the movie. There's one it was in part 2 where he arrests one of Carl's friends, and Carl's like, "You should have told me. I would have talked to him." I'm guessing that was based on Skeet Atkins. Who is Skeet Atkins?
Well, I don't think it was Skeet, because Skeet wasn't involved in moonshining. Skeet and Catherine ran a little club there in Selmer called Catherine's Club.
Okay. Yep.
And I've tried to figure out who that might have been, and I don't think there's any basis for it that I can tell that ever happened at all in reality.
What you said in the book? I mean, like in the movie or in the book? Because in the book you talk about like how, well, like he was taking payoffs from his wife, right, Catherine?
Yeah.
And but
Oh no, now Buford and Skeets did not get along.
yeah, and but he got along with Carl, right? Is that correct?
Him, Skeets and Carl were good friends.
Yeah. Okay. That's probably why I thought that maybe Skeet.
Yeah.
Like I said, obviously the movie was we're discussing is basically all fiction, but I thought maybe that was sort of a representation because from what I remember in the book, so he supplied Carl beer, if I'm correct. So maybe it wasn't moonshine, but it was beer.
It wasn't moonshine, but it was hard liquor.
Oh, hard liquor. Okay.
And Buford didn't want his dad drinking so much, and Skeets didn't care. He'd take it to Carl because they were buddies. And so therefore, Skeets and Buford didn't get along. Catherine owned the club when she and Skeets got married. And, Buford would come in to collect his payoffs, and Skeets would try to give him the payoff, and he wouldn't take it from Skeets. He wanted it straight from Catherine. And I asked, what all could you do? He said, well, she could sell hard liquor as long as we kept it out of sight. Said we even had little bottle holders under the table. So if you got like a fifth, and he didn't want anything more than a fifth being sold in any of these places in McNairy County. Of course, any hard liquor was illegal, but they had these little holders under the table where they could stick their bottle and keep it out of sight. And now when Buford had to step down due to term limits, he went into the Moose Lodge one time, and Skeets was in there, and Skeets thought he'd have a little fun with Buford and saying, hey, Buford, here's this last payoff I owe you. And it upset Buford, and Buford wanted to take it outside, and Skeets said he was ready. He said, I had a little 38 in my windbreaker pocket. And he said, the plan was I was going to step through that door. If anything got started, I was just going to gut shoot him.
Mhm.
And he says, I walked through the door and he hit me in the back of the head.
Wow.
And he said, just knocked me unconscious. So
Yep.
lots of wild stories like that.
Yeah. There's also another wild story. What did Buford end up using as target practice later on? From what you said in the book, it was his house.
On Skeets.
Skeets, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Skeets said that they're there in bed one night. And so this car passes by, and all of a sudden there's gunfire and bullets coming through the wall and landing in the wall right above their heads. Said, if we'd have sat up in bed, we'd have been shot. And he said, I got up, I ran to the window whenever the firing stopped. And he said, I could see Buford's car going around the corner. And he said there was 2 or 3 silhouettes in it, but the only one that he knew was there was Buford for sure. And that's the kind of relationship that he had. That was not supposed to be unusual for Buford, because somebody shot up W.O. Hathcock's house one time down in North Corinth, which they thought was Buford. And then, of course, Towhead White had a mobile home out on Highway 72 east of Corinth. And his mobile home gets shot up.
No.
Same way. So
a lot of coincidences happening over there.
Or maybe people just like to drive around and play like it's Chicago.
I think that what they need is they need to hire Frank Serpico to work down there. He would have found out the truth. Well, we mentioned Towhead White. I want to talk about the relationship between Louise, Towhead, and Jack. That's a very interesting story.
Okay. Well, like I say, Towhead got his first job down there at the 45 Grill working for Jack. When Junior quit his job there, he went into the Navy. Towhead decided that he would kind of follow suit. He went to I think it was the Air Force first and deserted. And then he thought, well, I'll try again. So he went to the Army and deserted. And so then they found him up in Montana. The FBI did, and arrested him for desertion. And that's when they found out that he wasn't old enough to be serving. So, he beats that. And he ends up eventually back at the state line. Jack and Louise, something a lot of people didn't know for years, is that they divorced in 1957 before they completed building the Shamrock. But they stayed together to operate it. I mean, she kept the home in Corinth. He kept the state line properties, and he lived in a little room in the back of the restaurant, even though he had other houses. At any rate, they were running it just like they always had. Towhead comes back, and Louise hires him, and he more or less starts managing the Shamrock. And he's wanting to do more, I suspect, than what Jack would allow. I think Jack had some common sense. Here's what we can do, and this is what we can get away with. Yeah. And Towhead wanted to take it up a level or two. And when I have a feeling that Jack kind of resisted that. And first thing you know, well, Towhead and Louise are a couple, even though she's 17 years older than him. And Towhead can have just about any woman he wants because he's such a handsome guy. Yep. But yet he settles for this woman that's 17 years older than him. First thing you know, well, he's living there. They're having this big romance. And Jack ends up getting shot and killed in Louise's room. He gets shot there. He walks out going either back toward his car or to his room there in the restaurant, which weren't that far apart. Walked about 100 feet, collapsed there in the driveway between the two facilities, and died. And then it was rumored that Towhead and Louise actually got married. Now, I did find Social Security cards with her last name is being changed to White. Her driver's license was had the last name of White but I've never found a actual marriage license.
Mm-hmm.
But then Towhead ends up going to prison for the three-state moonshine operation and the red carpet casino robbery. And while he was in prison, that's when Buford shot and killed Louise.
Yep. I want to talk about the death of Jack first, because according to what they say happened, Louise took the rap for it, for
Right.
killing. But you don't think that Louise is the one that killed Jack?
No, as a matter of fact, I think I've got it in the book where I have a little newspaper clipping in there about a 14-year-old boy
Bobby Anderson.
being in the room just before that the shooting took place. That was a Hathcock's nephew.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jack and Louise always had a lot of family living there at the motel. And Bobby happened to be there. He heard an argument in the room next to him. So he goes through an adjoining door into the room, and Jack and Louise are having words. And, Bobby said that, she said, no 14-year-old boy is going to tell me what to do, when he tried to get them to, kind of calm down. And as she's pushing him out of the room back into his room, and she locks it, but before he's out, he sees Towhead White in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always had my suspicions that Towhead was actually the one that shot Jack.
But why was Bobby never questioned?
He looked at, for one reason, I think he looked at Towhead as kind of an idol, wanted to be somewhat like him.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, he became his protege and apprentice, if you will, up until the day that Towhead was killed. So it's a complicated, family.
It definitely is. Well, we talked a lot about this, but you stated that there were two chapters that it was difficult for you to write, not because of a lack of knowledge, but because you gained too much knowledge. The first is called Payoffs. A good reason to be sheriff.
It's one of those things where you just realize as you're interviewing these people that were actually there, it's kind of like everybody is telling you that, well, yeah, I paid Buford. Some appreciated what he did. Said, like I had Betty Sparks, was later Betty G, said, that was just a cost of doing business. Said, I'd pay Buford. I could stay open late. I could be open on Sundays. I could serve hard liquor, and Buford would tell me if the state was going to raid me. Others, like Skeets, hated Buford. It's kind of like, we're doing all the work, and all you got to do is back up to get your paycheck every week.
Mm-hmm.
But what you find out is that everyone was paying him off.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't matter if you were a bootlegger, a moonshiner, a beer joint operator. You could even be operating legally, I'm told. And he would come in to get a payoff. And if you didn't, go along with it, a sheriff can find a reason to shut you down, even if it's just for a few days. You've lost business. So, it was just easier to pay him than not.
Well, you have a small list of people that he paid, or that were paying him off: Betty Sparks, Paul Moore, Hollis Jordan, DeWitt Dawson, Paul David English, Willie Beesplace, Junior and Shirley Smith, Ronnie Flanagan, and Carl Hathcock. And that's probably just a small list of all.
Oh, yeah. They're, and you think about this now. All the places in McNairy County could only sell beer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, no hard liquor. But most of them did sell hard liquor.
Yeah. And
you have to think about the fact that there were 30 different beer joints in McNairy County while he was sheriff. And, that's divide 30 into what, 9,000 adults. Mm-hmm. And you can see how everybody was fighting for business, just trying to keep a market share. So, yeah, you'd pay Buford if you had to, just to try and keep going. And, a lot of them he was friends with. He was close to Junior and Shirley Smith. He was close to Paul Moore. Betty G liked him. There were several of them that, even though they were friends, they'd say, "Yeah, we paid him."
Yeah.
So it's
Well, which bar and grill was he a silent owner with or silent partner with?
well, he was their allegedly silent partner with the Old Hickory Grill,
Okay, that's it.
and he was said to have owned a bar there on Airport Road in Selmer,
Mhm.
uh, but had it under somebody else's name. I don't know if that's true. I'm still looking into that one.
I'm sure you're going to get to the bottom of it. You always do. You put a lot of time into this, and I love this, and I have so much respect for what you're doing. This is great. There's also another story I remember. Was it one of his deputies or one of his officers? Somebody gave the payoff to them, and then they realized that like how much he was actually getting.
Yeah, I had one that said that he went down to Willie B's. That was the black bar. In the movie, they called it Willie Ray's.
Yes.
And, he'd go pick up money for Buford sometimes and said Buford it was always supposed to be in an envelope. And when he'd get back with it, well, he'd give it to Buford and Buford would open it up and hand him a little bit of cash out of it. And he thought, well, that's great, because I'm getting paid by the sheriff's office. I'm getting paid by Buford. So, everything is good. And he said one day he gets there to Willie B's, and guy's name was Willie Wade, and said Willie didn't have an envelope to put it in, so he just handed me the cash. And he said, I'm looking at it and thinking, gee, this is a wad of cash, and I'm getting that much of it. And said Buford got just absolutely irate that Willie would give him the cash without it being in an envelope. So just one of those little stories that you learn as you go through things.
Yeah. And there's actually a little bit deeper because was it Willie's daughter that he was having the affair with, and that's when Pauline was mad at him? Was it Pearl?
His name.
The niece, that's it. So it's a small town. There's a lot going on there.
There was a whole lot going on.
Oh yeah. I want to talk about Louise's death now. This is another interesting plot twist in the life of Buford Pusser.
And what is that again? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Louise Hathcock's death. I want to talk about her death because that's another
Okay.
interesting plot twist in the Buford life.
It was, well, in the movie, they call this individual Callie Hacker.
Yeah.
And she owned a bar. Actually, what the Shamrock was a restaurant set on the Mississippi side of the line, a motel under the same name set on the Tennessee side of the line. Mm-hmm. And that is what Louise ran. And, they would, and even Dennis will tell you that they weren't angels. They would get away with what they could. And that, if you had a few dollars, they felt like it was their job to relieve you of that. And at any rate, well, it's last day of January. The weather is really bad down there. 45 was a main route between the Gulf Coast and Chicago area. So it was heavily traveled. And during this winter storm, George and Dorothy Vogel from Illinois stopped at the Shamrock to get a room. They didn't want to try driving on the ice any longer. At any rate, they go over to the restaurant, they have a meal, and then they go over to the motel to get good night's sleep. Well, they woke up and feeling like they had been drugged. And then they noticed that different things that they had were missing, including Dorothy's purse, which contained something like $125 and a rosary and a few other things. At any rate, they go up to the office to check with Louise about this, and they said that she was drinking and that she was really belligerent, threatened to kill them. So they go out to the phone booth outside and call the sheriff's office. And Buford comes down with both of his deputies. And this is one of those odd things that I have a hard time understanding. Here, the weather is supposed to be really bad. And, the department was small. You just had Buford and 2 full-time deputies, and then a lot of constables and part-time deputies. But all the full-timers get in the car, go down to the state line together to deal with a woman, that is there by herself. And allegedly on the way, one of the deputies says, this could be bad down here, Buford, you better put your gun on. So allegedly he straps it on. They go into the motel office, they find Louise, and they start talking to her about this person. She doesn't know what they're talking about, so on and so forth. Well, when she realizes that Buford's actually going to arrest her, she decides that, well, maybe she better talk him out of it somehow. So she said, well, let's go back into my living quarters and discuss this there. I'll tell you what's going on at the state line, which is kind of odd thing is she was all that was left of the state line by then.
Yeah.
Jack, Towhead, W.O., all of them were out of it by this time. And so Buford goes in there and says that she calls him a couple of names, pulls a 38 out and fires it at him. He falls back across her bed. The bullet whizzes past his ear, goes through the window and lodges in an awning post over the little covered area they had outside the motel office. And, she stepped up again, aimed at him, started to pull the trigger, and it wouldn't fire. That gave him time to pull out his gun, and, he shot her 3 times. And he said, the first one nipped her in the neck, the next one hit her in the torso, and the last shot he never would really talk about. Well, when you see the autopsy report, he did shoot her 3 times. First time was in the posterior side of the shoulder. The second time was below the left shoulder blade and just a little to the left of it, with the bullet exiting out under her right breast. So it went through her body diagonally. And the third shot was to her head while she was laying on the floor. And, when you get down to it, by this time, the Jack Hathcock, something I might add here, had failed to pay income taxes for several years. So the IRS was getting ready to place a lien on the Shamrock. And apparently Louise didn't have enough money to completely pay off that amount. But Buford knew that she did keep a large sum of money there at the motel. And a lot of people suspect that he went down there for the purpose of actually killing her so that he would have time to look for the money before the IRS took the place. And so, but, until probably 2010, somewhere around that, 2008, 2010, was when we finally saw her autopsy report and knew that she'd been shot in the back. Until then, everybody thought it was a legitimate shoot. But when you think about the way that the shooting took place, and something I didn't mention was there were 2 people in a little kitchenette living room that was adjacent to her private room. And they said that they heard her begging for her life before they heard the shots fired. And the shots that were fired, Buford's gun fired all 3 shots first, and then they heard the pop from her 38. He was using a 41 Magnum. So there was a distinct difference between the sound of, so they knew who fired first. And, when you look at the trajectory of that bullet as it goes out through the window and into the post, it appears that the shot that she allegedly fired at him that whizzed past his ear, when you think about it, it's more likely that since that was the last shot that they heard fired, that he went over, got her gun, shot it through the window into the post himself so that he could claim that she fired first and he was defending himself. And by the way, he didn't find the money. That's another Towhead story.
Yeah.
He tore the place apart looking for it. Her niece, Barbara, who wrote basically chapter 8 in the book, I think it was, said that, well, even as a teenager, I knew of 3 places where Louise kept money in at the Shamrock. And one was in this wall, kind of between the motel office and her living quarters. It had a little panel there that you could move, and she would put cold cream jars full of cash.
Yep.
And hide it. There was one in the kitchenette area. And then she said, if Louise had too much cash, well, she would put it in a metal bucket and bury it in the horse pasture out behind the swimming pool. And when Towhead came home to her funeral, he allegedly paid the marshal off that was escorting him to give him 24 hours free. And he went to the Shamrock. He knew where all the money was, got it. And then on the way to bury Louise, on the way to the cemetery, he divided it up among people that were attending the funeral to hold for him until he got out of prison.
Okay. Yeah, well, I did read that in the book, and what you're saying is back then he allegedly recovered up to $250,000, and he had his friends hold it until he got out of jail. So Buford must have went crazy after that happened. I can only imagine. He couldn't find the money.
I'm told that he would go into the restaurant, for instance, and he would talk to waitresses and such as that, and just kind of quiz them to see if they had any idea where that Louise might keep her money, so he would know where to look. And of course, they had no idea, and none of them would tell him if they did know.
Yeah.
So
when you mentioned, and you made a great point. You're saying after Louise was gone, after Towhead was gone, there really was no mafia, right? That part. So it's like most people think that like for every day for 6 years was life and death struggle. Most of the story takes place in the first 17 months. So I want to talk about the 8 gunshot wounds, the 7 stab wounds that Buford supposedly, allegedly received. All right, and let's talk about that.
okay, of course, Louise missed him, so we don't get to count that one. But in January of 67, now keep in mind, Towhead had escaped from prison. He had walked off from a minimal security prison there in Montgomery, Alabama. And Buford was just nervous that, Towhead was coming after him, because he had killed Louise. So one night he allegedly stops a vehicle about halfway between Selmer and the state line. And, it's shown in the movie where he stops this vehicle, he walks up to the car, and there's several shots fired. And amazingly, here you've got a guy the size of Buford, and they graze his arm, they graze his abdomen, and they put 2 rounds through his the tissue here that apparently goes in his mouth and out the side without hitting gums, teeth, tongue, anything.
He's the luckiest guy in the world.
And so, there he shot 4 times.
Yeah.
And so then, of course, he gets shot. He claimed twice during the ambush that he was hit in the chin, but I don't think that happened. And then, of course, he was shot by Russ Hamilton on Christmas Day of 1968. And it's kind of like I was telling some people when they asked me about all these shootings that Buford was in. I said, the one thing that is a standard for a Buford Pusser shooting is somebody almost always gets shot in the head. Louise got shot in the head. Pauline got shot in the head. Russ Hamilton got shot in the head. Of course, Buford got shot in the chin. The only guy that didn't get shot in the head when he got shot was Paul David English, and that probably he was probably saved by the fact that Art Murphy, the chief of police of Corinth, was with Buford when he shot English. So otherwise, I suspect he would have been shot in the head. But that's just me.
He definitely had an MO. Right. So who is Charles Russell Hamilton, and what was his connection to Pusser?
Well, Charles Russ Hamilton was from McNairy County, and he was pretty vicious. I mean, he killed his wife, he killed his mom, he killed a co-worker, just killed a guy in prison, and somehow they always let him out. He killed a deputy named York in McNairy County. This was well before Buford was sheriff. So he, killed a number of people, but he was living in a little tiny apartment there on Peach Street in Selmer. It's Christmas Day. Buford's on the phone with one of his girlfriends. This Don Pipkins keeps calling and saying, my tenant, Russ Hamilton, he's threatening to kill us. All this. So allegedly, after a couple of calls, Buford gets tired of it because his phone conversation with his girlfriend's getting interrupted. So he goes down there, knocks on the door. He says Hamilton told him to come in. And as soon as he steps inside, Hamilton opens up with a little small caliber handgun. And Buford shoots him right between the eyes. And so then Buford leaves there, goes down the street just a little ways to his girlfriend's house to call the district attorney, let him know that he'd killed Hamilton. Yep. So that they could get things going. And his girlfriend allegedly raised his shirt when she's asking, where were you shot? And he's telling her, so, well, over here on the side. So she lifts up his shirt, and basically there's a red mark. And he doesn't even go to the doctor for that one.
Well, yeah, supposedly, how long was he in the hospital when his jaw was allegedly blown off? Was it one day, I think?
No, actually, that time he was in the hospital for 18 days.
Oh, 18 days. I'm sorry. All right. So
he was only in the hospital when he got shot the 4 times close to the state line when Towhead escaped. He was in there one night.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, and that's another one we were talking about. Because he feared Towhead, and that's another one where
he was trying to light a fire under local law enforcement and the FBI.
Yeah,
to get White back into custody so that he wouldn't have to be walking around looking over his shoulder to see if White was anywhere close by.
Yeah, because Towhead escaped from prison, but then after the shooting, he turned himself in, and then he served his time and went into the jukebox business. So he was trying to turn his life around. This is a Towhead. So he just finally had enough with it, and he says, I just don't want any more problems. All right, so let's talk about the April 3rd, 1969, the Pusser legend.
All right. We mentioned Bobby Anderson earlier.
Yes, we did.
And Bobby, like I say, was more or less his apprentice. And they were in this jukebox business together. And they were living in Clarksdale, Mississippi at the time. They came up to take care of some business. They checked into Junior Smith's El Rey Motel. They had different rooms. Bobby had things to do that day. He went his way. Towhead, for whatever reason, didn't want people to know he was in town. So he borrowed a car that he had bought for his sister, Rachel. And he was driving it that day. Supposedly he sees Junior's wife, Shirley. They are having some problems and, playing around on each other, whatever. Mm-hmm. At any rate, he says, well, I'm going over to Layton, Alabama. See DeWitt Dawson. Why don't you ride along with me? So she does. Allegedly, he's going over there to pick up some money that one of the people had been holding for him while he was in prison. So on the way back, they stop and at Arnold's truck stop, and she makes a phone call. Well, when they pull back into the El Rey Motel later that evening, Junior would claim that Towhead, as he pulled in, cursed him, had a handgun and shot at him. He stepped back in to the motel office, grabbed his rifle, fired several shots, hit Towhead, and killed him. And the odd part of it is that his Towhead's wounds don't match up with the trajectories that you would expect.
Mm-hmm.
There were rumors that Pusser was on the roof and that he was shooting down, but for that to have occurred, Towhead would have had to have been leaning up over the steering wheel and looking up to be shot in the forehead. I have heard that I've had 2 or 3 different people, one being a police officer, one being one of Smith's relatives, saying that Buford was close by that night,
Mm-hmm.
that he was seen. And so actually, I think, well, something I might mention here is that Barbara Anderson, when she heard that Towhead had been shot, she knew that he should have some money in the car, so on and so forth. She wanted to go secure it. Bobby was going to meet her there. They got there, opened the trunk of the car. The only thing that was in the trunk of the car was a yellow rug that was bloodied up like somebody had been laying on it, and aluminum foil like that they would wrap one of these metal boxes in whenever they would bury cash. And but there was no box of cash.
Mm.
So then Bobby gets to thinking, well, there's several $1,000s in Towhead's room in a shoebox. He goes in there and it's gone.
Yeah.
So who got it? Was it Junior and Shirley, or was it Buford, or was it a concerted effort? But Towhead was dead, and Buford had one less problem, and
a lot more money.
Got a lot of money.
Yeah. I think this is a case for Lieutenant Frank Drebin.
Police squad.
Yes.
So Leslie was great. I met him several times.
Who'd you meet, Leslie?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Where'd you meet him?
Here in Bella Vista. We used to do the company I was later with. We did a golf and tennis tournament for cancer research, and we'd raise anywhere from around $3.5 million in a couple of days. This was back in the 80s, and so we would invite all these celebrities to come in and play a round of golf, and then we'd hit up the vendor community because we have Walmart that's located headquartered here.
Yep.
And we'd hit the vendor community up saying, hey, you guys need to sponsor somebody to play a round of golf with one of these celebrities. And so, you'd pick up $5,000, $7,000, $10,000, depending on the sponsorship that they wanted to get into. And so we'd raise a lot of money. We'd have a gallery of about 15,000 people. And at any rate, he was one of the celebrities who would.
Yeah, it's funny. I interviewed Linda Day George, who started in the Day of the Animals with him. We talked about him for about a half hour, saying what a great guy he was, how hilarious he was. Because I don't know if you remember the movie, he wrestles the bear. It's funny. I love it.
I'll tell you what. One funny story about him. I took care of security for the tournament. Because we would have 125, maybe 150 celebrities up here. So I'd have to get a lot of police officers to volunteer, so on and so forth. And one of the guys I worked with, while I took care of security, he took care of the bars. And we had one place that was set up where just the celebrities could get into so they
Yeah.
could have their time away from the crowds.
Yeah.
Jim calls me up and says, hey, I've got a problem. What's that? It's Mr. Nilsson. What's the problem? Well, he's sitting in a chair in the middle of the room and he's passed out. Okay. They vacuumed all around him, all this. He's passed out. So, we have to, I just got in bed. It's 2:30 in the morning. I just got in bed. So I had to get up, get dressed, drive back up here to Bella Vista, take Mr. Nilsson home, me and another guy, put him to bed, and we're thinking we can forget him doing anything tomorrow. He is out of it. 6:30 the next morning, here he is up at the golf course, ready to go.
I love it.
Never know that he had an ounce to drink.
It's funny because I hear all these stories. Like, I'm sure you know who was it, Oliver Reed. He was a star in the 70s, and you hear all these stories, and you see him in these talk shows. He's trashed. There's a movie he played in called Burnt Offerings, and they said he would drink all night, but they said he'd be up there 5:30 in the morning, and just like nothing happened. He would do all his lines. He wouldn't be hungover, or if he was hungover, he didn't show it. It's like, wow, that's impressive.
Have all kinds of fun up here with those folks.
Oh yeah,
but it's I miss those days.
Yeah, it sounds like fun.
It was.
It sounds like a good time. Well, speaking of stars, was it around that time when Buford started to become a celebrity? What's his name? Was it W.R. Morris? Wrote a book. Supposedly Buford had no idea who this guy was, but what's the real story with that book? Because I read that. It's called The 12th of August.
Yeah, 12th of August was written by W.R. Morris. It in my book, I believe I have their contract.
You do.
And so Buford knew who he was. He had been a reporter for the Daily Corinthian in Memphis. Pardon me. The Commercial Appeal in Memphis.
Okay.
And so he had heard all these stories about Buford and what was going on there, as Buford built his legend. And so he comes down to beef his legend up a little bit. And he writes this book, 12th of August. And of course, Buford was where he got all of his information, basically.
Yeah.
And so he wrote it the way that Buford wanted it. And then Buford would say, oh, I don't know anything about this, And it's just quite a mess. Then they got into it legally. It seemed like that everyone that Buford got into business with just about, because they formed the Pusser Corporation, which consisted of Lloyd Tatum, Buford's attorney, Buford, W.R. Morris, and Eddie Bond, who was a singer. And, he recorded all these songs about Buford going bear hunting with a switch and all this. And when the movies started to come along, I think that Lloyd and Buford wanted the other two out of the picture. So they forced them to sell their stock. Both of them said that they were afraid that if they didn't sell the stock back to them, that Buford would kill them.
Oh my God!
There were trials over this, and at any rate, they didn't know the movies were coming down the tube, but Buford and Tatum did. So I think that was just probably more about greed than anything else.
Yeah.
And but they had their problems after Buford became somewhat famous.
Yeah. So the books came out, and that got the attention of Hollywood, and Hollywood went to the Pusser family and said, we'd love to do a movie on your life. Is that how it happened?
Pretty much. Of course, according to Joe Don Baker, who played Buford in the first movie, he didn't know it at the time, but the studio planned for that to be a big loser for a tax write-off.
Oh.
Backfired. It became a hit.
It's sort of like, what's that? Mel Brooks, the producers. It's like Mel Brooks, the producers. That's
And
funny.
so they just thought it would tank, and instead it caught everybody's attention. I guess America was looking for a hero. I mean, here we'd been in Vietnam and
Yeah.
had all these political assassinations and everything else that had gone on in the 60s and early 70s. And I guess America was just looking for a hero, and Buford seemed to be it. And the movie just, it held box office records, for years as far as sales. And allegedly, when Baker found out that it was originally supposed to be a flop, he wouldn't do the other sequels.
Ah, so that's where they got Bo.
Yep.
Okay.
Bo and I talked about doing a documentary about Buford, and then Bo indicated that he was still under contract with Sony, and Sony owned was the parent company to who had Walking Tall, and decided it might not be a good idea.
Yep.
So.
Yep. I'm gonna be meeting him on April 27th at the Chiller convention. I want to talk to him about speaking with you and the whole see what he tells me. But that's funny. So in the first movie, the real Buford Pusser was the technical consultant. I'm guessing he was on the set, and then it was after that when Joe Don Baker didn't want to do it, they said, "Hey, Buford, you want to play yourself?" Is that how that came about?
Yeah, and he went out to California, did a screen test. Apparently, did well enough that they thought that he could pull it off. And of course, having the man himself play himself, I imagine they thought would be a big draw for the box office. And so, he comes back to Selmer. He mows his lawn, goes to the county fair, and after signing a contract that day in Memphis to play himself in the next movie. And that was the night he had his accident.
Oh, yes. So let's talk about the accident, because as I mentioned, I met one of his friends. He goes, yeah, in the movie, for people, I'm sure everybody who's watching this interview knows about the movie, knows about Buford Pusser. They make it seem like the mafia, Dean Witter I think it was Dean Witter, John Witter in the movie.
John Witter.
Yeah, John Witter had him killed because Buford was too much. We have to get rid of him. And his friend said he was just reckless. He liked to drink. He liked to drive really fast. And let's talk about his death. So he's out partying, he's celebrating. And what happened next?
Well, he goes to the county fair. He's supposed to be in a dunking tank, which the mechanism wasn't working, so he didn't have to do that. He left the fair. Dewana was there with him, but she was going to ride home with some friends.
Mm-hmm. So that part's actually true in the movie.
Pardon?
So that part's actually true in the movie then, because in the movie they portray that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's about 15% of the movie that might be true.
We just found it right there. The one true part.
And so they're on their way home, and Buford passes them in his Corvette.
Mm-hmm.
And the lady that's driving the car that Dewana's in says, I hope he doesn't kill himself before he gets home, because they're just outside of Adamsville. And sure enough, they get on down the highway a little bit, and they find, his car there, and it's on fire. He had been ejected from the vehicle through the T-top of the Corvette. He actually, when you look at the photographs, the skid marks, it looks like that he may have gone off the right shoulder and came back on the highway, overcorrected, went into a spin, went across a gravel lot, across a adjoining road, and hit an embankment about 35 or 40 miles an hour. And the car flipped over, landed next to the highway, and Buford was right behind it. And when uh, Dewana gets there, she and another guy pull his body away from the car so that because it was on fire by that time.
Yep.
And of course, you never hear that this adult helped her pull Buford away from the car. They always make it sound like that Dewana pulled him away.
Yeah.
But everybody speculated that it was the state line that they finally got Buford, that they had killed him, this mafia syndicate, whatever you want to call it. But actually, I interviewed Paul Irvin, who was the trooper that worked the accident. And he said, I filled out my report. I turned it in. We'd done everything like you're supposed to do it. And he said, my supervisor kept giving me the report back and telling me I had to refine it. And he said, I kept refining it and refining it. And he says, the sixth time that I refined it, seventh time he had actually done the report, he says, the only thing I changed was I took out the fact that he was 0.18 on his BAC. And said, when I took that out, they took it. And said they just didn't want anyone to know that he had died a drunk driver.
Wow.
And no plot to kill him. You had the state that checked the vehicle for signs of sabotage because everybody was so alarmed about it that he had to have been murdered.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't find anything. Helen Pusser spent a ton of Dewana's inheritance having Buford's death investigated, but she hired experts from GM to look at the car, and they couldn't find anything.
I want to talk about that right there because I wanted to get to that. So, according to your book, she spent over $100,000 of Dewana's trust fund, and she was taken to court for that. Did she get in trouble at all for that? Was she taken to court by Dewana?
I guess basically yes, but of course,
Dewana was young.
There was the legal people behind it that were saying, "Hey, this isn't right," because technically, Helen was only supposed to be able to spend a maximum of $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
For Dewana's needs and care and so on and so forth. Well, in the meantime, she was using it to pay Larry Britt, a private investigator, who was basically doing nothing but just taking her to the farm. And, he was milking her for everything that he could get on that because he knew that there was some pretty deep pockets there. And so by the time that all this was stopped, Dewana only had a very few thousand left in her trust fund, and caused a rift between her and Helen for a while.
I was going to ask you that. Was that the end of their relationship?
Wasn't the end of it, but it certainly didn't help anything.
Right. Well, the reason she was doing, she thought, or somebody told her, maybe it was the person you mentioned, that he was poisoned, and she wanted the body exhumed.
Right.
That was a big thing. So what if that was the case? Why were Carl and his brother John so against his body being exhumed, and why was she so much for it?
Well, Helen was convinced that he was murdered.
Okay.
And I think Carl and John realized that, hey, if they do any kind of toxicology test, they're going to find out that he was intoxicated, and he was known to use uppers. So they might find drugs in his system as well. And that would certainly not do your hero's reputation any good.
And I think probably at that time, Carl's thinking about the future because another movie was just about to be made. He was the technical consultant on the second two, the final chapter and part 2. So he's probably thinking to himself, no, let's
how to keep this thing going.
Exactly. So yeah, I don't know. So there's a lot going on here.
Well, there's so much to this story. It's a story that just keeps on giving.
Well, there's a little bit more I want to talk about because regarding this, we mentioned Lady A. She's still alive, so we're not going to mention her name. what was she afraid of, and what note did she leave?
Well, uh, I found out just recently that Lady A was actually engaged at the time that she was having uh, her little fling with Buford.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm told that she's embarrassed by all that now. Hindsight's 2020. You look back and you think, I was like what, 18, 19 years old at the time. And you don't look at things in the same view as you do as a full-fledged adult. So, she's embarrassed by, I think, what all happened back in those days. But Buford contacted her. They hadn't seen each other for a while. And he contacted her. He was going to be in the movie, and he made a date with her to go to Pickwick, which is a lake area over there. And she got to thinking about all the things that she knew and so on and so forth. And I guess she thought that there was a good chance that he might be taking her out there to get rid of her.
Wow.
So she left a note at home saying, if I don't make it back, and unfortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view and who you are, the night before that date was when Buford was killed in the car wreck.
There's a lot of people that were afraid that he was going to kill them.
Yeah.
Like you said,
he was not a nice guy.
Yeah, well, you said it perfectly. It's like, if he liked you, if he really liked you. If he didn't, watch out. Get the hell out of the way. Yeah. Right. Who is Nimbo Price?
Nimbo Price wanted to be a protege of Towhead.
Okay.
And, he was another one that idolized Towhead, wanted to be like him. There was, I guess, back in those days when you're in a poor part of the United States and you see some guy like Towhead, late 20s, early 30s, going around with a wad of cash in his pocket, and driving a Cadillac and always well dressed. You wanted to be him.
Yep.
And that was some of these younger guys. And at any rate, he was one of those that would do just about anything that Towhead wanted. Mm-hmm. And just one of those things.
Yep. All right. And then what is the James Smith deposition? And he said he knew who killed Pusser. What's that all about?
I think that was a con game. Because if you notice on that deposition, there is nothing that shows who took it, what law office it might be from, or anything like that. It's just typewritten sheets. James Smith was married to Robert Floyd's daughter. Bobby Floyd worked for Jack Hathcock. Mm-hmm. And I think when all this started, and Buford was getting some fame and fortune, I just kind of suspect that maybe they decided, well, maybe we can cash in on this. So we'll come up with this deposition telling about what all that we know about Buford and about how he was going to be murdered and all this and what we tried to do to stop it. And, just didn't succeed.
Yeah.
And because when you examine the document, there's nothing on there that indicates that it's a legal document in any way.
Yeah. Well, we mentioned there was one scene in the movie out of all the three movies that actually had a little bit of truth. I found one other scene, and I looked at it, I said, wow, there actually was something that was true. The person's name was John Grant. So what did Pusser do to John Grant? It actually happened, I want to say, in part 3, the final chapter.
That was John Grant. They called him Flagpole because he was tall and skinny. And, he was said to like to abuse his wife and his kids. He'd be physically cruel to them. He'd take the kids' school books, throw them in the oven and try to burn them, and just whatever he could do whenever he'd get drunk. And so allegedly Buford got tired of having to go out there and deal with him. So along the way, he stopped and cut him a switch about as thick as your thumb. And when he got there, he asked Miss Grant where he was. He said, well, he's down in the barn, but if you go down there, he's got a gun. He'll probably shoot you. Buford went down there and used the switch on him. And when he was finished, he said, today I whipped you like you were a little boy. Next time I come out, I'll whip you like you were a man.
Yeah.
And never had to go back out.
Well, in the movie, they stepped it up a little bit where he had a son. He took the son and put him in a good place where he can play with horses, and he was.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It really made him seem like the all-American guy.
I don't think it was like that.
Yeah. No. From the 2 hours that we've been talking, we definitely know it wasn't like that. And there's another. I want to talk about this because the big thing that he is known for is, and they even sell it at the museum, Buford Pusser and that big stick. Did he ever really carry one?
The only time that I'm told that he carried or used a stick was he went to arrest some moonshiners one day, and there were something like 6 of them. And I guess between the 6 of them, they thought they could take him on. So he saw a fence post that was laying nearby, picked it up, and that was the story of the big stick.
Yeah.
Didn't carry one otherwise.
Yeah. Why, was it in the movie?
But actually, I'm told also that when he found out that they were going to incorporate that into the movie, that he was insulted. They had to shut shooting down for a day because he became so irate because, you know, he didn't want anybody to ever think that he had to use a stick to hand out justice. So.
Which I think is funny because that's one of the biggest things I think people think they know the real Buford. They love to say, oh man, he didn't carry a gun for 3 years. He carried a stick and he took care of justice and he got things done. And people respect him for that, who think that the real Buford is the Walking Tall version. So that he got so angry that people would think that.
Well, you know, we talk about Buford, and earlier, you know, we discussed Bill Way a little bit.
Yes.
Talk about justice. Bill Way told me a story one time about him and Buford getting into it a little bit, but it was over a driver. Buford, I guess, whenever he wanted a little cash, he would stop out of state cars, and he stopped this one. And of course, Buford drove an unmarked vehicle. He goes up to it and he's addressing the guy, and the guy is black. He's from the north. He's down south. Here he's got this huge man walking up, wanting money, and saying he's a cop. He's looking back at the car. He can't tell that he's really a cop. So he decides that he's going to leave. So he hits the gas. Buford grabs him by the arm and hangs on. And just about literally rips the guy's arm off. And he was in the hospital the next day when Bill Way heard the story. So he goes down to interview him, and this guy tells him about it. So Bill goes back to ask Pusser about it. And he said that's the last time that he wanted to get crossways with Buford, because Buford just let him know how it was and how it was going to be. So he could be intimidating.
Yeah.
You know, like Bill was saying, I was mid-20s. And he said, you know, I wasn't a large guy. And he said, Buford was huge. And he said he did have a way of putting the fear of God in you.
Yeah. And he just, I mean, from everything he did, he knew he was above the law. He can get away with pretty much anything and nobody really messed with him.
Right.
So he was really, besides Towhead, he really had no fear.
No.
Wow.
Really didn't.
Well, you know what? I had the best time talking to you. We gotta do part 2 after the Pauline verdict comes out. I definitely want to have you back on the show. Before we go, though, I want you to promote what you have, your book, your YouTube channel, anything else you want to promote. But is there anything that we did not go over that you want to talk about?
Well, let's see.
Because I know there's a lot to the story.
I am still trying to figure out Einstein's theory of relativity. So if you've got another few hours, I'll sit back and listen.
Actually, I do. All right, take it away.
No, I'm going to listen. You're going to tell me about Einstein's.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, it was great having you on the show. But yeah, so right now it's April 16th. The show, I'm going to make sure it airs on, if not next week, the week after. And then I'm going to have you on again May 2nd. That's when we'll do around that time. Whenever it's good for you, let me know.
Yeah, we'll get together and figure it out.
Yeah, most definitely.
You know, I don't know when I suspect that the autopsy is complete since they've got Pauline back in the ground. I don't know what's going to take place after that. I'm following that right now. And, I'll be out there with some information whenever I find out.
I love it. Keep up the great work. So, where can people find you? And where can they find your book, your YouTube channel, and whatever else you want to promote?
My book is on Amazon. My Facebook page is Buford Pusser, The Other Story.
Right here. Great book.
My YouTube channel is Buford Pusser, The Other Story.
You're very consistent. I love it.
So everything I do is right now is Buford Pusser, The Other Story. I am working on another book that I hope to have out in the next 3 or 4 months, and it's going to be about the ambush, what all I've learned about it.
Yep.
There's a lot of things, like I said, that I haven't been able to discuss. When the TBI got involved in this, and they asked me for certain things that I knew and certain information I had, I don't feel like I can disclose that until that they finished with their investigation, because this is a case that they do want to get wrapped up.
Yep.
So
right. Well, looks like I'm going to have you on multiple times then, because I want to hear more about this too. you're going to be on like every other week. You're a regular in this show. I love it.
Hey, I'm retired. Every day is a Saturday for me.
You know what? I want to party with you, Leslie. Let's have a good time. Come on.
Well, I don't want to go where Leslie is to have to party.
Oh, I forgot about that. All right, let me take that back. We'll find another star to party with.
We'll find somebody.
Exactly. R.I.P. Leslie. Well, I want to say, I love what you say. Your motto is the truth has no agenda. Buford Pusser, on the other hand, what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. It doesn't matter who you are. So, Buford, the truth is coming out, and we have Mike Elam to thank for that. Thank you very much for being on the show. I look forward to having you back on multiple times. 1, to find out about Pauline. 2, to find out more about the ambush. And 3, the theory of relativity. That's it was great having you on the show. Loved it.
All right, I appreciate you having me.
You're very welcome. That wraps up the latest episode of The Claw's Corner. A huge thanks goes out to author Mike Elam for taking time out of his extremely busy schedule to be a guest on my show. Don't forget to subscribe to his YouTube channel, Buford Pusser, The Other Story, and buy his book of the same name on Amazon. A huge thanks also goes out to editor extraordinaire John Bristol of the award-winning Elmwood Productions for always doing a superb job editing this show each and every week and making it available to all on YouTube. I am also extremely grateful to Joseph Timothy Quirk and Rob Bull for all they do to make my show available on several Connecticut radio stations, as well as Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, Audible, and iHeartRadio. And lastly, but definitely not least, I need to thank you, the viewer, for always tuning in. Enjoy your day, everyone.
Suckers! All of a sudden I hear, brim, brim.
What's a diaphragm again?
Ha! We caught one.
They're supposed to be weird.
Oh, yeah, no. If you say so.
I've always wanted to be in a movie.
Waiting around for autumn, waiting around for autumn.